to start? Well, first of all, welcome, and I really mean that for everybody, and perhaps we can all learn something tonight, particularly with overcoming what I would call the divide and conquer mentality. I don't like to see this as an us and them issue. I found it quite tough for many years to speak what I feel is the truth. And it became apparent that for me to really express what I felt was going on in my community and the school, so-called school that I was a member of, I was starting to be quite fearful, and there were repercussions for saying what you really felt was happening and expressing your opinion. So tonight is another level for me, personal level, to go beyond that, to address that my own fear of just expressing an honesty and an observation and a history of life in Ramtha land. And I've been around for quite a while, and I would like to tell my story, if you like, and later in the evening field some questions. But for now, we're going to start the evening with Joe Szimhart's presentation. I think I covered everything. Joe, do you think that's all covered?
You want to introduce people as they get up?
Yeah, I'll introduce each one perhaps,
okay.
In case you forget. Now, there is one more thing. Oh, yeah, really, who am I? My name is David McCarthy. My history here is lasting 18 years now, and I was once a member of RSE, Ramtha's School of Enlightenment, and I would like to talk about that later on. So on the tables to your right, there are some brochures, some flyers, and also, if you're not comfortable with asking a question publicly, up front, then we have some cards and some pencils. You can write your question out and address it to one of the speakers here. So perhaps I should give you their names now. We have obviously Joe Szimhart. We have Alexandra Mena. We have Robert Mena, Alexandra's father. And then we have Jeff Adams. And I think each one of us has a particular expression or some knowledge, I think, balances out what we're trying to convey tonight from different areas of this experience of Ramtha's School of Enlightenment. So again, anyway, thank you for being here. And for some of you, it took a lot of courage just to be here tonight. And I particularly thank you for coming. It's not an easy subject we're dealing with, especially when, I add the word cult there. And what are we doing? We're dealing with a cult, and it's a very loaded term. So thank you, and thank you, Joe.
Okay. Hello, as David said, my name is Joe Szimhart. I flew in here from Philadelphia. I live near that area. We spoke last year in a similar situation that was under the auspices of Life After Ramtha School of Enlightenment. And I was a keynote speaker then. They invited me in. I've known about the group for a long time, since the early 80s, and about its history. And I've exit counseled perhaps 24 members out of the group over the years. Now, what is exit counseling and what is an exit counselor? I'm going to cover that somewhat in my talk here and give you an idea. It's a euphemism also for a word that used to be around called deprogramming. This is a really hot topic. A lot of people are disturbed by it. Some people need to hear the information. Other people hate to hear the information. So if you have questions or objections, please wait till the Q&A period after we're all done speaking, and I can address them then. And that applies to all the speakers. So, and I appreciate your respect for all of us in that regard. What I'm going to try to do here is frame this problem so you get an understanding of where the, what's that? Okay. Is that better? Okay. I'm going to try to frame this problem so everyone has an idea where my community of people that address this from a critical point of view, how they see the word cult, and I'm going to reframe that word because the word actually has a neutral meaning in academia, and it doesn't have a negative connotation when you use it as a scholar. You can have a cult of saints, you can have a cult of a rock and roll star, you can have all kinds of cults that aren't good or bad. It's a neutral term, and all it means is an intense form of devotion to a person, idea, or object. That's the basic meaning of the word. What we're talking about here are organizations, groups of relationships that tend to be malignant or harmful in some way, or very controversial. They tend toward totalism, and they tend to be self-sealing systems. That's what I'm going to be talking about. And these kinds of group formations that have been around for thousands of years in human history have caused problems, and there's been reactions to them. Some of the religions in their earliest forms were like this. Outsiders didn't like them, they were persecuted. And as they adapted to the societies around them and made adjustments, they tended to grow and thrive. The groups that don't do that, that can't make the adjustments to society, they continue in the totalist mode, they continue to stay elitist, tend to fade away because of tensions with the next generation. And especially groups that are very dependent on a leader and don't have good leadership in the second and third generations tend to fall apart and fade away. So we're looking at those kind of groups as very unstable, highly elitist, very grandiose vision, totalist tendencies, that kind of group. What I want to look at here is I have a video of an ex-member of a group, a member that I had exit counseled. She was in a group called the Circle of Friends back east in the around 1990-91. This is what you'll see her speaking in 1991. And I'm going to use her introduction to kind of begin to frame this. She's speaking at a Cult Awareness Network conference. And she's on a panel of 6 recently exited ex-members of 6 different groups. And 3 of the people walk away on their own after being in 10 years, 5 years, and 20 years. One of them, with my help, and he approached me for the help, exited his martial arts cult after talking to me and a few ex-members of his group, and he was on the panel. The one I'm showing you was the only one among them who was coercively removed from her group by her family, and I met her at the safe house and we talked. Now, again, this is back in 1990-91. I don't do that kind of work anymore. I stopped participating in cases where anyone is coercively held. I just want you to know that I haven't touched a thing like that since 92. And I didn't do that many of them anyway. But I'm using her as an example because it goes right to the heart of this matter. So I'm going to put this on here to see. But just to give you a little more background on this, since I was going to talk about it anyway, the group she was in was called Circle of Friends. Her family decided to intervene because the leader was in jail for student loan fraud. He had mostly female members, mostly young. His name was Joe Szimhart. And the followers considered him to be like Christ on earth today, the most enlightened human being on the planet. Okay, so you get a better idea of where we're going with this. This is about 6 months after she left the group with help.
I didn't try it. It was a thought. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Awakenings? There was a scene. I knew I was going to do this. There was a scene in the movie in which Robert De Niro, after he's been awakened, stands in front of a fan, and the fan is blowing on his face. And that was real powerful. Because I thought of all of the things, the life that I had been living for 3 years, because of a lot of people, I experienced an awakening. I was a part of a group called the Circle of Friends, and they're not a very friendly circle. Very unfriendly circle. And the leader is a gentleman by the name of George Szimhart, who, thank goodness, is now in jail. And I made the comment that I think justice has been served, and I was quickly reminded that divine justice has not been served. Someday he will have to atone in whatever way for all the things he's done to people. But there were a lot of people who took a lot of risks in helping me get out. my parents. I've never been able to cry in front of a whole big group. Usually when you give a speech, it's presenting a scientific paper or something like that, and it's nice to know that it's okay to cry in front of other people. My parents came to the meeting last year in Chicago, and the first, I wasn't there. It's an understatement. I wasn't there. But I thought back to how they must have felt. And confused, curious, hopeful, scared. But they got answers.
We're happy today.
So many things I want to say, but anyway, I wanted to thank everyone here that's been a part of helping me. My ex-counselor, that ex-counselor who I really misjudged when I first met him. I was sitting there with this smug little cult person on the end of the bed. I had the involuntary approach, and I survived it. But I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, this smug little person. And when I saw the ex-counselor walk in, I think he had kind of had a difficult day in traveling and all that. I'm thinking to myself, this is the man my parents hired to deprogram me. I certainly learned that first impression. He knew an awful lot. An awful lot that I hadn't known before. But anyway, I just wanted to thank the people who helped access me to my parents and then helped me to access my mind and got back the thinking skills that I knew that I had. While my involvement with the group was relatively short, I'm sure that as I get older, it's going to seem even shorter. But there were just so many people, wellspring. I can't say enough about what they do. I had this whole speech written out. But just don't give up. Please. Don't give up.
Basically, what she's stating there is a situation that she got into as a college student. She was in the liberal arts. She met a person there, a young lady that was in this group who was recruiting. She switched her major suddenly to dentistry, to pre-med, and to get into dental school. She has no basic background in science, but the reason for that was she could get a much larger loan. And that loan went directly to this cult leader, and then she dropped out of school. That's why the leader ended up in jail. They convicted him of student loan fraud along with one of his top people, George Szimhart, and that's what she said. At the time she was taken, exit counseled, he was in jail at the time. He did get out. So what happens in an intervention like this? Why would she, in a short period of time, over 2 days, talking with me, sharing information, suddenly change a deep conviction she had for 3 years, one that made her she was cut off from her family because they were critical of the group, and she refused to tell them where she was and what she was doing. And they finally found out where she was, and they arranged for her to be picked up by a former police officer that posed as someone that tricked her into thinking she was being arrested. Because other people in the group had been arrested already, and she just assumed she had to go with him. She ended up at the safe house to talk to me and one other person. But the one thing I want to get to is, okay, so what was the problem? What's going on here? Well, let me just frame it a little bit. George Szimhart was a Hungarian, born in 1919. He studied for the Catholic priesthood in Hungary. He dropped out of the seminary, later attracted to esoteric teachings, including those of Rudolf Steiner, Edgar Cayce, and astrology, and Eastern religions. He began to blend these into his own framework for how reality works, and he began to see himself as a Messiah figure, as the person that is here on earth to represent Rudolf Steiner's teachings. And Rudolf Steiner to him was some sort of a saint or an ascended master now. He founded Circle of Friends, the group in the late 1970s, and he was convicted of loan fraud in New Jersey in 1988 and went to jail for 4 years. He always had several women around him, young, beautiful women. He dressed very well. He spoke very well. He seemed to be a well-educated, elegant man if you would just meet him on the street. And yet, he had some very bizarre ideas. For instance, people testified to this, that at a grand jury that they lived in a kind of a communal situation, cut off from most of society. They worked around the clock as security guards, substituting for one another and doubling up on paychecks that way. They studied the teachings of Rudolf Steiner continually, as interpreted by George Szimhart. One of the things that they testified about that is he presented himself as a mystic and a psychic who has the ability to foresee the future, and we considered ourselves students. They felt that the world was going to collapse, the economy was going to collapse, and that they were going to be the elite people surviving it. So they had like a doomsday type of a mentality about the future. Again, what you see on stage, what the group presented to the public, was quite different than what was going on behind the curtain, behind the stage. And that's what the ex-members would testify to in the court hearing. And the whole thing about the money was he felt that if you got it, you had a right to it, no matter how you got it, because the world was going to end anyway. That was his justification for the theft. So how did I get to her? How would an exit counselor deal with the situation? Obviously, you have to communicate with her. She has to trust me that I know what I'm talking about. So the way I approached this was to look at the basis of the entire group. The teachings was to look at Rudolf Steiner. And in looking at Steiner, he's another controversial figure in the world of esoteric teachings, if you know anything about him. He died in 1925. But he had some bizarre teachings, and I'm not going to go through all of them because we spent a lot of time with him. But one of them was that the Buddha, who was under the mystical teaching of a character called Christian Rosenkreuz, if you know what Rosicrucianism is, Christian Rosenkreuz was a mythical figure that founded the group. And this is what Rudolf Steiner's writing says. This is one of the things I pointed out to her that she wasn't aware of. And by the way, Steiner was like a channeler. He called it supersensible communication with supersensible beings. He felt he could communicate by sitting in his chair and going into these other worlds and bringing truth down to us here. This is one of the things he wrote. A conference of the greatest and most advanced individualities was called together by Christian Rosenkreuz, his most intimate pupil and friend, the great teacher Buddha, participated in these councils and in the decisions reached. At that spiritual conference, it was resolved that henceforward Buddha would dwell on Mars and there unfold his influence and activity. Buddha transferred his work to Mars in the year 1604. On Mars, he performed a deed similar to that performed by Christ on earth in the mystery of Golgotha. Christian Rosenkreuz had known what the work of the Buddha on Mars would signify for the whole cosmos and what his teachings of nirvana, of liberation from the earth, would signify on Mars. So he had a belief that Mars was populated. He had a whole lot of strange beliefs like this. Some were not so strange. Some seemed scientific. But there were 6,000 pages of this stuff. So I helped her to deconstruct this. It was one of the things we did. among a number of other things. And she, like she said, like in the movie Awakenings, at some point, even after the exit counseling, she suddenly realized that she came out of like a coma of sorts, or another world that she was in for 3 years in this group. And seeing reality again, much like the De Niro character, she really identified with that. Like sensing reality for the first time in a different way. Now, how does that happen? A lot of it has to do with our knowledge of the brain and how some of this stuff called brainwashing affects us. This was a book written recently in the last few years by Kathleen Taylor, a neuroscientist in England, called Brainwashing, the Science of Thought Control. All she's looking at here is what goes on in the neurocomplex of the brain under certain types of influence. She uses this Robert Lifton's model for thought reform to base her discussion on brainwashing. It's called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. This fellow, Dr. Lifton, studied Chinese brainwashing in the 50s and reported to the U.S. government and other people what that was. You know, how did they do it? How did they accomplish all of that? And he analyzes it in his book here. This is one of the basic documents that the programmers and exit counselors have studied and used in their work to try to help people understand how this sort of thing works. So there's a lot going on here that I've had to learn and study over the years and try to educate people. Primarily, an exit counselor is an educator. And you have to have rapport with someone in order to be able to educate them. And it takes time, it takes work, it takes backing up your information with valid facts that can be verified by the person later on, because you're only with them for temporarily. If you're misleading them in some way, they're going to find out sooner or later anyway and be very angry at you. So it's best if I try to back up everything I say as an exit counselor. There's a few things I wanted to cover, but I think I've taken up my time, and maybe I can answer them during question and answer. I think maybe if I triggered some interest in what I had to say here, you can ask me about it later. The other speakers are going to take about 15 or 20 minutes each to present their topic. So I had two models of what I thought was a benign cult as opposed to a non-benign one. Let me put this on here. This is just the New York Times article about the cult leader that was convicted I was talking about. And this is Rudolf Steiner, the mystic that was behind the teachings of the Circle of Friends. This was his book where the Buddha goes to Mars, that he talked about that in that book. I'll pause this. I'm working on this model of what I consider like a benign cult or a more open system in terms of this kind of phenomena that we're looking at here. I'll be giving a lecture about it at a national. But what I have here is in a more benign system, you have a transcendental purpose at the center of things. There's not a person there. There's an abstraction. It's a mystical idea, ideas that you can't prove or disprove, but you gain through experience or through learning by other people's experience. So there's a transpersonal purpose behind these kind of groups. In this benign model, the leader is peer-reviewed by outside persons. In other words, there's a way to get rid of them if there's something wrong with them. They subject themselves to peer review. In the sense of their attainment, their spiritual attainment, they're no better than anybody else in the group in a benign system. You know, much like the Pope in Catholicism can go to hell as much as any other Catholic, you know, and people understand that. They're human. They don't operate from the center of this system. Also, there's a reasonable exit and entry process. So laterally, with the society around a group like this, there's a more open communication. There's an easy relationship with the people around them that don't believe the way they do. And there's not a lot of paranoia and phobia about the world's running, how it's running. There are some problems, you know, in terms of exit perils, meaning if you leave the group, certain things might happen to you, but there's not an emphasis in this kind of a group. And And most of the members, you know, they have a fairly decent relationship with their families, and even if they're not in the group or whatever. So this is a more expansive view of cult, the healthier type. There we go. All right, now we're looking at a closed system. In this kind of group, the transcendental purpose is occupied also by the leader. People invest the leader as having the qualities of what they want. That person has attained this enlightenment, and they want some of that. They want to become ready for ascension, or whatever it is the person's teaching. What happens is they're invited into this circle. They end up in this narrow world surrounding the leader that feels like they're getting somewhere, but they can never take the position that the leader's in these groups. There is a wall there. They never quite get to the point of attainment. They also learn, once they're in, that suddenly the world's a really bad and awful place, and it's going to fail, and the world might collapse, the economy might go, the government has this major conspiracy out there, there's all kinds of stuff in our water, there's all these phobias that are introduced about how bad things are now that you're in. And so now you're sandwiched in between two places as a member of a group like this, between the exit perils, because if you decide to leave, you've got to face all this stuff. And what are you going to do? You know, is it real? Is it not real? And you can't really grow within the group because there's a limit as to what all of the promises are handing back to you. You seem to be going around and around, kind of a circle, or in a ditch if you want to look at like that, and never quite getting the magical powers that they claim you're going to get, never quite getting all the healing that you're supposed to get, never quite maybe getting all the money. Maybe a few of the members get it, but the general population of the group are like drones. They just continue, they go to sessions, workshops, you know, and maybe they live on a commune, and life becomes very circular, very closed in. It's called a self-sealing system by some scholars that have studied this phenomena. And if you want to exit, you're basically a failure. You're going to go to hell. You're going to have 10,000 lifetimes on earth before you get a chance to do this again. I mean, there's all of these phobias that are introduced to you when you're in a group like this. So it makes it very hard to leave psychologically. Sure, you can walk away, but this stuff's all in your head. That's why you call it brainwashing, or whatever you want to call it, or thought reform. You police your own thoughts according to the system, and it's real difficult to leave until you get new information. As that young lady Ann said in the tape, she got new information, saw things differently, and had an awakening. Almost like a born-again experience. Now, much easier. All the phobias are gone. The mystic that occupied the center of everything, he's now a human being. I was able to draw the curtain. The Wizard of Oz just became another guy, you know, behind another human being for her. And now she was eye to eye with the leader after the exit counseling. You know, he's no longer superior to her. And that's basically what happens in a more open system. Okay, so thank you for your attention. Like I said, if you have any questions of me later on, I'll entertain them.